welcome back everybody to another episode of AGX Media. Joining us today, we have a very special guest, considered one of the greatest champions of silver, Keith Neumeyer of First Majestic. Keith, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, Nick, it's nice to meet you for the first time.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure. And as always, guys, if this is your first time joining us, please go ahead and subscribe to our channel. Every like, every follow, every comment really amplifies the message of the silver money movement that we're creating here. So let's start, Keith, with how do you feel being described as a champion of the silver movement? As that's how many, including those within our own community, describe you.
Well, it's been challenging, I can tell you that. When I put the company together back in 2002, silver was around $5 an ounce, and I called for $50, which was, to me, it was a bit of a no-brainer. I thought we were entering into a pretty interesting bull market in gold, which I knew would take silver with it, and that's exactly what happened. I didn't think it was going to take, almost 10 years to accomplish it, but, it finally hit $50 in April of 2011, and, which is great to see, obviously. It did great for the shares, and we were making all kinds of money, but I wouldn't have expected that silver prices would have dropped from 50 to 13 over the next 4 or 5 years. That was the big shocker. And I coined the phrase triple digit silver back, I think, about 4 or 5 years ago now, for my view on the supply demand fundamentals of the metal. And I feel that I'm alone most of the time, and I have been alone for a good chunk of the last several years. But one thing that's given me some I guess comfort or what have you is other people have come out and started saying the same thing. I'm no longer alone as the triple digit silver bull, and there's others. And people ask me, well, how do you come up with $100 silver? How do you come up with triple digit silver? Well, it's pretty simple. It's we're mining 8 to 1 worldwide. What does that mean? For every 1 ounce of gold, we're mining 8 ounces of silver. So you divide the current gold price by 8, and in theory, if you base your pricing on pure supply demand fundamentals, you get a pretty lofty number of silver, and that's where it should be trading, in my view. We got down to about 31, 32 on that ratio back when silver hit $50 in 2011. Next time we have a major rally, I think it's going to break through that previous low and go much lower.
Right. So speaking of triple digit silver, do you feel like this could finally be the year with the new administration and the potential of the Green New Deal? How much silver would be needed to meet the requirements of this deal?
Well, it's a big question. For one, I hope that doesn't happen. It doesn't do any of us any good, particularly the miners, to have a big spike up in metal prices that maybe can't be sustained for a longer period of time. It takes about 10 to 15 years for a mine to get brought into production from discovery, and that's a long time. And there's lots of uneconomic ore bodies on the planet, whether it's copper or silver, that are just simply uneconomic because the grades are just too low. And the grades meaning, for those laymen that are potentially listening, is the amount of silver in a ton of rock, because that's your economics. So that's grade. So the more silver in a ton of rock, obviously it's more economic to mine it, because you've got your fixed cost to pull this rock out of the ground, process it, throw a bunch of chemicals at it, get your silver out. But along that line, you have to discover it. Then you got to get all the permits in place. Then you got to construct it. Then you got to hire all the people and build all the infrastructure, the roads, the water, the electrical, housing. It's a huge task to build a mine. It costs hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, and takes over a decade often to do it. And you need permits all the way along the way to do it. And finally, you get this thing producing. And when you first decide to pull the trigger on building this mine, you're running your economics at, let's say, $25 silver, which is today's silver price. All of a sudden, somewhere during that 10-year, development construction phase, silver prices go to $13, and you have to stop construction because it's no longer economic, right? And how many times has that happened in my career? I've been in the mining sector for 35 years. So, there's mines out there that have never seen the light of day, that have been sitting there for 20, 30 years, that maybe one day they'll be producing mines, but you're going to need, $100+ silver, $3,000 plus gold, $5 plus copper, just to get these mines built, because the mining companies just don't have the stomach. They can't take that kind of big risks to make those big capital investments. So you talk about, well, how much metal's needed, for the Green Deal. Well, it's a fantastic question, because I'm trying not to give you a long answer, but unfortunately, it's just a long answer. The auto sector and the solar panel sector are the real two big drivers for silver. For copper is obviously the auto sector. Those are your two primary metals necessary for the electrification of the earth, to do the things that the Green Deal calls for. So over the last 4 years, mining companies have been producing less silver each year. In 2020, the number somewhere around 750 million ounces of silver was produced worldwide by all the silver companies in the world. Going back 4 years, that number was about 880 million ounces. So it's dropped, pretty significantly, consistently for the last few years. And that's grade related, discovery related. The investments aren't going into these investments because the mining sector has not really had the capital, to make these big investments to bring this silver online. So the silver is sitting in the ground, not supplying metal to critical industry. So what's it going to take, right? So you're in a market right now where the world is consuming about 1 billion ounces, just a little over 1 billion ounces of silver every year, and the miners are producing 750 million. So that deficit of 250 million ounces, half of it's being made up from recycling. But the recycling is dying because there's really less and less to recycle, because most of the recycling used to come from hospital film and things like that, and most x-rays are now electronic, so most hospitals don't use film anymore. So then it comes from electronics. Well, China, a year ago, just stopped importing all the computer waste around the planet because they became the dumping ground for all this computer waste that was coming from Europe and North America, and it was just causing pollution problems in China. So they stopped that whole business. So now all this computer waste is building up around the planet with no home. So nothing's getting recycled anymore. So these big 40-inch televisions, computers, all this stuff, is just sitting there, and it's a real problem for supply. And the auto sector, and I'll just add one more element to this, because this is, I think, an important element, is the auto sector, because that's one of the biggest driving forces coming into the silver industry, as far as I'm concerned. So there's 1.4 billion automobiles sitting on the surface of the earth today. Mostly fuel combustion cars, obviously. There's 2019, I don't know what the 2020 numbers are, but 2019, there was 94 million cars manufactured worldwide. Of that 94 million, approximately 4 million were electric cars. So the cities around the planet and governments around the planet are wanting to replace the entire fuel combustion fleet with electric vehicles over the next few decades. Some cities are bold enough to say 2030, others have said 2040. So at $25 silver, how could you possibly replace over 1 billion vehicles worldwide over a 10-year or 20-year period? You couldn't do it. It's absolutely impossible. You couldn't produce enough copper. You couldn't produce enough silver. The raw materials necessary to accomplish these tasks that the governments are trying to accomplish just simply don't exist. So, you need metal prices at much, much higher prices to get the mining sector interested enough to start investing in some of these mines to get this metal to market.
Some really fantastic insight there, Keith. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. So we've spoken at length now about silver industrially, but what do you think of this movement that's gone on to restore silver as a medium of exchange, as money in the world?
I know there's a lot of people that look at silver as a monetary metal. I don't. I think we're past that. I don't think it'll ever become a monetary metal. I think gold will become a monetary metal. But there's a lot of gold around. There's more gold on the surface of the planet today than there ever has been in human history. Silver is quite different. The above ground stores of silver are at critical levels. There's really not much in the way of silver around anymore. All the big commercial hoards, all the big government hoards, it's all sold. And we're in as I said earlier, a 250 million ounce deficit approximately, if you don't take into account the recycling component. So it's a big problem and copper's a big problem as well. I just don't see an end to this. And if governments tried to turn coins into silver like they did in the 60s when I was a kid, it'd be ridiculous. They couldn't. There's not enough silver around for electronics, or automobiles or solar panels. How could they possibly turn silver into coinage?
Right. So going back to the speculative side of things then, what do you think when people compare silver to other speculative assets, for example, like Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies?
Well, I don't look at silver as speculative. I don't look at gold as speculative. These are things that should be in everyone's portfolio. Of course, people have, different tolerances, and they have, different net worths, and they have to, adjust their portfolios according to what they believe their needs are. So I'm not going to say to someone, oh, you should have X amount of % of gold or something. It's because, my risk tolerance for investment like that is obviously going to be a lot higher than others because I've been in this business for 35 years. But, I've always had gold in my portfolio and silver in my portfolio in different forms, in the form of physical and also in the form of equities. I own First Majestic, I own First Mining Gold, and of course I'm the chairman of that and CEO of First Majestic, and I dabble in all kinds of other mining stocks as well because I'm familiar with the industry. But no, the shares themselves are speculative for sure. Because you got management teams, you got risks of potential failure or profits or whatever the case may be. So they're speculative. Equities are speculative. But when it comes to actually the holding the physical metal, I don't look at that as a speculative investment.
Good insight once again. So finally, Keith, let's talk about the stellar results. First Majestic reported its Q4 2020 production results last week with a strong finish to the year. While annual metal production slid year over year due to government-mandated shutdowns in Mexico, the company has had a solid year given the circumstances. Love your insights on this.
Yeah, credit has to go to our team for one. It just what we were able to accomplish in Mexico is just amazing. At last count last week, I think we've done something like 65,000 COVID tests company-wide. Actually, if you're at a mine site, you could potentially get tested 3 times in a single day, which is, sounds a little bit overkill, but if you go from the office to the mine, you're going to get tested. Well, actually, the second you arrive at the office in the morning, you get a quick test. And then if you leave the office and have to go underground, you get another test. Then if you have to go to the mill, you get another test. So it's a little bit nutty, but that's the protocols that we have, right? So we had to implement those, and it's worked quite well. Mexico fortunately deemed mining as a critical industry, as did Canada. So we only had a six-week shutdown. So it wasn't huge like it was in other places like Peru or Argentina. But it was very disruptive, as you can imagine. Telling everyone to go home and is always tough. And these mines are these are huge industrial complexes, and just to shut a big complex like that down, it's like really an issue. And it never really gets completely shut down because you've got power needs, and you've got pumps, and you've still got stuff working. So there's always a skeleton group of people around. But we got them all back and working, and you're right, we did come in with a 24 million silver equivalent ounce projection for 2020. We came in at about 22 million due to COVID. The Q3, Q4 numbers were quite fantastic, I thought. And so we had a pretty good year despite everything. And we're now projecting basically things go back to normal in 2021. We're projecting about 24 million ounces of silver equivalent production. And all we do is produce silver and gold. We don't produce any other metals. And so it's pretty simple business. And yeah, so we're investing again heavily, and we're looking for pretty dramatic growth. We think 2022 and 2023 are going to be great growth years for us.
Fantastic. Keith, once again, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, appreciate your time, Nick, and nice meeting you.
Pleasure. All right, guys, that's all we have for today's episode. Hopefully you enjoyed what you heard here today. And if this is your first time, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel and head over to agxpay.com to learn how the power of modern silver money can help you claim financial freedom. Take care, guys.